when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be. I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still waters, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. And for a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. These words are from the poet Wendell Berry, and they were favorite words of Buddy MacKay's. And I think I understand why they are, because if you've ever been out to Ann and Buddy MacKay's home, this sounds like their backyard. This sounds like their homestead situated on the banks of Lake Weir. And when I hear these words, I can picture Buddy on his back porch, maybe not lying down on the green grass, but certainly reclining in a chair in the afternoon as the sun sinks low, looking out over the still waters, watching where the wood drakes rest and the great herons feed. His home and the beauty of the natural world around their home, I believe, was one of Buddy's sanctuaries in this world. It was a place where he would rest in grace and feel free in soul. So that is one of his sanctuaries, but this place too was Buddy's sanctuary, Fort King Presbyterian Church. Buddy loved this church and all that it stood for. And I am convinced that Buddy experienced that same rest and freedom and grace and soul here as well. The words of Wendell Berry remind me of the words of another great poet, one from ancient days, who spoke similar words that I'm sure Buddy repeated on many an occasion. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. So on behalf of the people of Fort King Presbyterian, I want to extend a warm welcome to you all, to the entire MacKay family. And I know you have traveled from near and far to be here, and it is our honor to have you here today. And to the rest of you, distinguished guests, we are so glad that you are here. Again, having come from near and far, I've had the opportunity to speak with a number of you, and as you have shared with me that you wouldn't have missed this day, this occasion for the world. So thank you for being here. I know that your presence will always be remembered and cherished by the family. You are Buddy's colleagues, Buddy's friends, Buddy's the people who have worked with him and toiled alongside him and who have enjoyed one another's company. So welcome here to Fort King. In many ways, Fort King is the church that Buddy built. He was the driving force behind the founding of this church 60 years ago, and he, along with the other founders of this church, wanted to start a church with a both very simple and yet at the time very radical idea. They wanted to establish a church that welcomed everybody, regardless of the color of your skin or any other difference. All are welcome in this place. And it is that vision that Buddy and the founders of this church had that still is our vision and our mission today. So welcome to all of you here today. So we are gathered here today to celebrate the life of Kenneth Buddy MacKay Jr. And that is right and a good thing to do, because in so many ways he was a great man. But even more importantly, he was a good man. And those two things don't always go together. But he was a good man. And we are here today to celebrate his life, his achievements, his contribution to Ocala and Marion County and the state of Florida and to the nation and into each one of our lives. We're here to celebrate and to give thanks, but we're also here to worship God. Yes, we are here to worship God and to give witness to our faith and to the hope that is ours in the resurrection. And to the belief that we have that Buddy has departed this life, but has begun his next life in his new home, sitting on the banks of another shore, a distant shore. And now his soul is at rest and he is free. So let us worship God. Would you join me in a word of prayer? Oh God, author of life and death, you are the beginning and end of all things. Creator of heavens and the earth around us, and are present in each and every one of us. And we know that you are ever ready to hear us than we are to pray. And you know our needs before we even ask. But now I do ask that you would be present among us and show us your grace, so that in the mystery of death we may see the light of eternity. And I would ask that you make each person here today, each one of us, strongly conscious, strongly aware of your presence with us right here, right now, in this very hour, in this very place. And help us to focus our attention on you and on your word and on your promises and on the gifts of your Spirit, so that even in pain we might find comfort, so that even in sorrow we might know hope, so that even in death we might experience resurrection. And we ask this all in the strong name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. We will remain seated for all of our hymns.
O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is thy name in all the earth. Thou whose glory above is chanted by the mouth of babes and infants. Thou hast founded a bulwark because of thy foes, to still the enemy and the avenger. When I look at thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast established, what are humans that you are so mindful of them, and mortals that you care for them? Yet thou hast made them little less than God, and thou dost crown them with glory and honor. Thou hast made them stewards of the works of thy hands. Thou hast put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the fields, the birds of the air, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is thy name in all the earth. The word of the Lord.
Reading from the prophet Isaiah. Hear, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and you who have no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your earnings for that which does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me, and eat what is good, and delight yourselves in rich food. Incline your ear and come to me. Listen so that you may live.
For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. For as the rain and the snow come down from heaven, and do not return there until they have watered the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goes from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose and succeed in the thing for which I sent it. For you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all of the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress. Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. And it shall be to the Lord for a memorial, for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. This is the word of the Lord.
A reading from Mark. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. Instead, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be servant of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." The word of the Lord.
A reading from Philippians. Do nothing from selfish ambition or empty conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Received and heard and noticed in me, do them, and the God of peace will be with you. The word of the Lord. So, indeed, not sure how Britney Spears ever mastered these things. Of all the things that you and I loved and admired in Buddy MacKay, what stood out most to you? His formidable intelligence, his kind, affirming nature as a friend, church member, husband, father, grandfather, his political achievements, or perhaps that steadfast integrity, even if it did sometimes get in the way of his electability. Well, here's one that may not have been at the top of your list. I'm going to let this thing go after one more try. The one that may not have been at the top of your list. His wry, sly, understated sense of humor. His was not the joke-telling, bring down the house sort of humor. He used it as a scalpel, rarely to wound, but rather in a gentle way and often directed more at himself than at anyone else. It served to de-weaponize differences of opinion, whether in church life, family, business, or politics, and remind everybody that we're all in this together. But that type of humor also allowed him to sum up in a few well-chosen words things that took others pages to express. His autobiography was full of such examples, but one in particular stands out. Early on, when Buddy's good government ally, Reuben Askew, defeated the incumbent governor, the flamboyant, cantankerous, ethically challenged Claude Kirk, news writers spent gallons of ink and reams of newsprint analyzing the contrast between the two, and usually casting it as the good guy versus the villain. But Buddy's book nailed it in one diplomatic sentence. Quote, Reuben Askew was a straight-laced Presbyterian who disapproved of everything that made Claude Kirk so interesting. Now, in talking with Buddy's family, the trait you hear most is that of a servant mentality. An embodiment, perhaps, of those words we just heard in the passages from Philippians. Try to have the mind of Christ, who chose not to be exalted, but humbled himself, taking the form of a servant. And then, whatever is honorable, just, commendable, excellent, keep on doing these things. So the servanthood, the humor, or whatever else may have stood out to you, how in the world to summarize a life like Buddy MacKay's? Well, let me focus instead on just one afternoon early in his political career that for me encapsulated so much of who he was. The year was 1974, and Buddy was 41. The Florida legislature was making its first timid pass at growth policy and environmental protection. And who else would be put in charge to chair the committee that would be in charge of such a thing? Now, one of their first orders of business was to conduct a hearing with representatives of the petroleum industry who were proposing offshore drilling and increased shipping lanes in Florida's waters. Because there was major construction at the Capitol, the hearing was held instead at a teaching auditorium at one of the nearby universities. I happened to witness this event because I was serving as Buddy's part-time administrative assistant while finishing up a graduate degree at Florida State. Only 40 minutes into the hearing, it had become clear that one person on that committee was 3 steps ahead of everyone else in terms of quickly grasping all the technical detail and the full implications of what was being proposed. And using that trademark sly humor, he ever so diplomatically, in his questions and comments, made it clear that he wasn't buying any of it. I happened to be seated right behind where the various petroleum reps were awaiting their turns to go to the pulpit or to the podium. And one of them turned to the guy next to him and whispered, "Who is this guy? I've never seen such a quick study. He's killing us." When the hearing finally concluded, I had to pass right behind where the Capitol Press Corps was seated, where they were gathered. And there I overheard one of the veterans explaining to a rookie, yeah, that's why he gets chosen almost every year as the most effective member of the legislature. But not 2 minutes later, I suddenly witnessed a totally different Buddy MacKay. We happened to leave the building by a different exit. And as he came out that door, he suddenly let out a theologically laden expletive and exclaimed, "Can you believe this? Some idiot has trimmed these camellias into a hedge." You don't do that to a camellia. Someone's going to hear about this. And in that moment, I glimpsed the two sides of Buddy's life. The skillful legislator who had just dominated that hearing was also the man of the soil who had grown up absolutely in love with the flora and fauna and waterways of his native Florida, and was part of an extended family of distinguished horticulturalists who knew about camellias. And if his pronunciation of that plant sounds a little strange to your ear, I decided right then and there that if Buddy MacKay said it that way, who was I to let the dictionary stand in the way? Now, decades later, Ann and Buddy and Dana and I learned that there is a fine theological word for someone who is comfortable and skilled at living simultaneously in two different worlds. In the Celtic spirituality that is part of Buddy Scott's Presbyterian heritage, there were certain people who were revered as what were called liminal figures. They were those who stood in the threshold between two worlds that needed to be brought together somehow. Now, in Buddy, we saw many examples of that liminal character. As earlier mentioned, as a native son of Old Florida, he nonetheless led the way back in 1964-65 in getting First Presbyterian to spin off this congregation as the first integrated church in Ocala, even managing to convince everyone that it was the senior pastor's idea all along. And as a leader, first in that church and then in this one, he was deeply committed to biblical theological integrity, yet bravely led his Sunday school class in exploring new vistas that were not bound by traditional dogma. And we later saw Buddy standing in the threshold between two worlds when, as a product of conservative Ocala, his political career rode nonetheless on the votes of liberal professors in Gainesville and transplanted New Yorkers in Fort Lauderdale. And even later, after his brief governorship, yet another example of operating comfortably in two different worlds, serving for 2 years as President Clinton's personal envoy to the Americas, negotiating with Latin American heads of state on matters of international trade, all the while having his heart firmly rooted in the sand and citrus and cow manure of Tiger Head Farm. Of course, in our tradition, we believe that the ultimate liminal figure standing in the thresholds of life was Jesus. And since one of our professors years ago at Union Theological Seminary always insisted that the funeral is not primarily about the deceased, it is about Jesus, let's then turn our attention to Jesus for a moment. You and I know, of course, about Jesus being God incarnate. As such, he stood in the threshold between two worlds, what Celtic spirituality calls that thin veil separating earth from heaven. And in gathering for this service, we're affirming that Jesus bridged that divide, bringing the kingdom of heaven among us. But let's also remember that as a threshold character, that Jesus who was hailed as Prince of Peace and confounded the religious authorities in Jerusalem was also the Jesus whose life began in a stable and who spent his early childhood as a refugee. And the same Jesus who could have chosen upward mobility spent his life, as they say, comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comfortable. That's why we're here today, to recognize once again the new reality that Jesus proclaimed and to celebrate Buddy's life as someone who, as much as anyone I have ever known, tried to embody that new reality. There is a reading that our Jewish spiritual cousins use in the evening service on Yom Kippur, their holiest day of the year. It begins with these words: birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey. And then in tracing that journey, it mentions such landmarks as moving from ignorance to wisdom, joy to gratitude, from health to sickness. Then the reading concludes, quote, looking backwards or ahead, we see that victory lies not in some high place along the way, but in having made the journey as a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting. Buddy MacKay's sacred pilgrimage has come to its destination. And through that thin veil separating earth from heaven, if you listen closely, perhaps we hear rejoicing. Thanks be to God.
Good afternoon. After Dad died, when me and my three brothers gathered around the table with my mom to plan the funeral, we decided to highlight Dad's personal side, our family, his work in this church, and his efforts to make Ocala, his birthplace, a better place. We knew that coverage of the political side would be extensive, and there are things we wanted you to know about him as a father, a husband, a brother, and a friend that won't be covered in the press. And it's strange, but for me, the most notable memories are not the conversations and experiences that we had over the last 10 or 15 years, but rather the ones from my adolescence, almost 50 years ago. Crazy. For as long as I can remember, there was never a day that Buddy MacKay didn't take a nap. His office administrator, Samelia King, who predeceased Dad, used to create a daily schedule that would show his appointments, including some code word like daily conference call that we all knew was nap time after lunch. Those naps could be anywhere: on the floor of his office, in a car, on an airplane with his chin propping his head up, or a traditional nap on a couch. And until his later years, it was always exactly 15 minutes. He had that gift of being able to close his eyes and enter sleep within a minute and awake refreshed. So it was fitting and comforting, really comforting, that he left this world during an otherwise routine nap, almost like it was part of his and God's grander plan. Dad's original motivation for entering politics and for being involved with others starting this church was his unwavering belief in racial equality. My earliest recollection of his passion for this was when we had an orange grove about 10 miles north of Ocala. Back in that time, apparently his passion for environmental causes had not yet developed. Because my recollection is that we burned about 10,000 gallons of smoky fuel oil on a cold night, doing what we called then firing the groves. This involved lighting a heater next to each orange tree. One night after the lighting was done, Dad wasn't involved in the usual tradition of standing around a fire and telling stories, having a sip of bourbon, waiting for sunrise. Instead, on this occasion, he sat in the truck with the engine running and the heat on. After this had gone on for a while, I got in the truck and I said, "Why aren't you out with everyone else?" And he pulled his feet up off the floor and only had socks on. One of the men who had come to help us that night only had a double layer of thin socks wrapped in duct tape. And when Dad saw that, he gave him his boots. As an early teenager, I would never forget that. And later in life, I would always see the parallels between he and his friend Lawton Childs and the way they used an old pair of boots. My dad was a rule breaker and a rebel. Some of you know that, but many of you don't. The rebellion was at its peak during his Air Force years, based on the stories shared by one of his best friends who served with him and who later became my Uncle Bob Fisher. It tapered some after my brothers and I came along, but it never really went away. Back in the 70s, campaigning required a lot of driving to places like Romeo, Alachua, Palatka, Lake Butler, mostly on the weekends to attend county fairs or church services. And the travel frequently interrupted Dad's previously mentioned nap times. Between age 12 and 13, I became his campaign driver. I know this because our campaign car was a 1972 Buick LeSabre, donated by the Cavanis, Drake, and Williams families with a bench seat. A lot of people don't know what a bench seat is anymore. We perfected what we called the driver swap. This maneuver was developed because there was never time to stop, because those of you that know my dad well know that he is never on time. So while going down the highway, I would hold the wheel from the passenger side while he slid out of the driver's seat. I would then crawl over him while he held the wheel, and we'd be off to the races as a 12-year-old. I would then crawl over him, and just before we got to the destination, he'd once again tell me for the millionth time that he couldn't afford for the local police to stop us, and we would do the process in reverse. It was not only his way of teaching me to drive and to trust, but also his way of making sure that his unbroken string of naps was never interrupted. Our dad was a fighter. He didn't allow setbacks to knock him down. He and my Uncle George were only in their 20s when my grandfather was killed in a commercial airplane crash in Gainesville. My Aunt Liz and Uncle Al were still teenagers. In the following years, he and George fought to keep the family businesses afloat and be successful. Similarly, his campaigns for office didn't always end in success, but he continued to battle back to find a way to express his beliefs and to create change. We were blessed to grow up with him, to have a role model that made it a point to be home every weekend, to be an encourager, to pass on family tradition, values, and memories, and most of all, to be a quiet fighter that never stopped trying to make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. The sheer number of people gathered here today to celebrate Pop's life shows the impact that Buddy MacKay had on the world and on our community here in Ocala, Florida. I've also been really touched reading all the stories and social media posts online, each celebrating his legacy of service, dedication, and his integrity. He'll be deeply missed by all who are fortunate enough to know him. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ted MacKay, and Buddy MacKay was my grandfather. I've always known him as Pop. Mac and I and our sister Lily, we were blessed to grow up next door to Pop. When I picture him in my head, I can see him working on his garden and his beloved camellias next door, always starting early to beat the Florida heat and greeting me with a smile when I'd come outside. I could always feel that he was genuinely happy to see me. Looking back, my fondest memories with Pop were working outside on our property at the lake or at the orange groves and cattle farm. I always thought of Pop as the fun grandpa because working with Pop was exciting and it was always an adventure. It wasn't typical household chores. My friends would even get excited when I'd ask them to come along. We did a lot of work that you can still see today at the farm. We put up fences, we planted rows of pine trees, and we made sure the groves is a place that can be used and enjoyed by future generations. My favorite memories were always our controlled burns. We do them every few years across the property. And these controlled burns usually always turned uncontrolled pretty quickly. I have a distinct memory of Pop, Mac, and I running for our lives through knee-deep fire as it started to close in around us. But this is the kind of stuff that was really exciting to me as a teenager. During these controlled burns, Pop also allowed Mac and I to learn how to drive on the job at 13 years old. We would drive around our old water truck to try to keep everything under control. The truck may or may not have had working brakes, but that made it all more exciting. Some of my other favorite memories I recall with Pop, they all involve the outdoors. It was things like dove hunting, going camping, the nights we spent in our cabin in North Carolina. And more recently, it was sharing a glass of wine on the porch at Lake Weir, and watching the birds, the gators, the otters pass by and sharing stories with each other. One of his greatest skills was the Southern art of storytelling. All of us grandchildren can remember gathering around Pop, drinking Nana's famous sweet tea, as he told us stories of his younger years growing up in Florida, working on the farm, and of his Air Force career. Somehow he never lost patience with us when we'd ask him to retell the same stories over and over and over again. The stories weren't just entertainment, there were life lessons wrapped up in them as well. He taught us humility, to appreciate nature, and the number one thing that stuck with me, common theme today, was to always maintain a sense of humor and a positive attitude. As you can tell, Pop was a hero to all of us in the MacKay family. He was a man who not only inspired by his words, but by his actions and the way he treated people. He was certainly my idol, and I know our entire family and many others here would say the same. We lost Pop on New Year's Eve, and the New Year's a time of change for most. So my New Year's resolution is to live more like Pop, be selfless, love your family deeply, and always find joy in the simple things. I think if everyone lived like Pop, the world would be a better place. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who I have not had an opportunity to meet yet, my name is Mac MacKay, and I'm one of the grandchildren of Buddy MacKay, who I also knew as Pop. When I first began trying to find the right words to honor my hero, I thought back to a conversation that Pop and I had when he told me, "I want my funeral to be a celebration." And then I recall him mentioning something about whiskey. And I briefly considered using that as a theme today, but then I began to imagine the consequences I may suffer from my wife, mother, and grandmother. if I tried to incorporate whiskey while I honored Pop. So I abandoned that plan, and I continued my search until last week, Rob Batzel shared a New York Times article written about the two sets of virtues that are common to all people: resume virtues and eulogy virtues. Resume virtues are skills that you bring to the marketplace, while eulogy virtues are those deep-seated moral fibers that demonstrate whether you are kind, brave, honest, or faithful. I've always held a deep admiration for Pop's resume virtues, and my hope is that the historical record has and will continue to accurately address that portion of his legacy for future generations. Today, I want to share and acknowledge the eulogy virtues of the grand old man, which is the name he gave himself after retiring from public life, in classic self-deprecating fashion. I'm confident that the reason you are here today is because Pop's virtues impacted your life. What I want to draw focus to, though, is a trait of Pop's that's not as well known, and that's his connection with his grandchildren. He was an exceptional public servant, but he was a better grandfather. At the age of 4, Pop and I developed our very first shared interest: heavy equipment. Some of my earliest memories with him include activities like riding on the wheel well of tractors, plowing rows of orange groves, and being tasked with holding a long stick to beat down the Jurassic Park-sized banana spiders which strung their web across the rows of orange groves. We would also sit together during dove and duck hunts, where he would offer his sage advice like, "Thou shalt not shoot thy grandfather." We also shared an interest in the Civil War. When I was in elementary school, I remember having standard conversations between a young boy and his grandfather about General Longstreet's march around the Union flank at the second day of the Battle of Gettysburg, Colonel Joshua Chamberlain's infamous defense of Little Round Top, and of course, Stonewall Jackson's surprise attack at Chancellorsville. We also shared a common interest in what we collectively described as, and I put this in quotations, adventures. This included things such as when he taught my brother Ted and I about pine tree riding when we were about 6 and 8 years old. And I know you are all sitting in your seats wondering, what is pine tree riding? Well, it is where you climb up a sapling pine tree until it eventually either bends over while you're 15 feet in the air and returns you softly to your feet, or violently snaps, as in Ted's case. Before I spoke today, I reached out to the other grandchildren because I wanted to learn about their shared interests with Pop. What I expected to hear were similar stories about Civil War, heavy equipment, and falling out of pine trees. However, nearly every single one of them gave a different answer. And it was then that I realized that Pop gave us the best gift any grandparent ever could. He invested his time and his energy into our lives. I want to take a minute to read through some of the texts I received when I asked the other grandchildren about their favorite memories or experiences with Pop. Sally said, "I enjoyed going to volunteering events with Pop because he'd make them memorable and fun experiences." And I'm going to go off script for a second. I specifically remember Pop, Sally, and Lily making up a song when they were delivering meals to less fortunate people on Christmas Eve. And the song was titled, "We Are the Meals on Wheels Girls." And I hear that they're going to sing it at the reception, so do ask them about that. Lily recalled that, "I love sitting in nature with Pop, whether it be the sunrise in North Carolina or the sunset at Lake Weir. We enjoyed appreciating nature and listening to the birds sing." As for Ted, I didn't really ask him because you got to hear from him today, but I just assume it's pine tree riding. Nate, I'm going to read a direct quote from Nate where he asked me, "Could you please work in Pop taking the fall for me after I crashed a golf cart into a ravine?" Emily said, "I enjoyed watching Carol Burnett with Pop." And this is quite possibly the best example of his varied interests with all the grandchildren, because I have no idea who that is. Shelby said that, "I appreciated how Pop always made me feel included in everything we did." Genevieve told me I enjoyed feeding cows out of the back of Pop's truck. Leander said, I just enjoyed hanging out and talking with Pop. And Vivian said, I like to give Pop hugs. These are just a few examples of experiences the grandkids enjoyed with Pop. And I'd encourage you to ask the other grandchildren about their stories with the grand old man. Despite the fact that he shared different interests with all of us, there is a common theme that runs through our experiences with Pop. He taught all of us 3 virtues that he encouraged us to live by through his actions and his words. And I feel it's important to share them with you today. They are: number 1, live a life of service to others. Number 2, maintain a positive outlook no matter what the circumstances are. And number 3, love your family deeply. I will continue to try and honor Pop by trying to follow these virtues in my own clumsy fashion. Thank you all for joining us today, and God bless.
My branch of the clan is up in Tallahassee, so I tried to put my remarks about Dad into the form of driving home from Tallahassee back to Ocala. So leaving the old Capitol in the rear view, he wouldn't take the interstate, even though it might be faster. He headed out through Waukena and Caps and Lamont and Eridu and Idaho and down to Perry. He always appreciated the beauty of the land around him. Here in particular, cypress swamps, cabbage palms, ditch irises that he would bring home in the spring. And he loved his Scottish heritage, hence the kilt. The Highlands, Loch Laird, which is the family homeland, Killiecrankie, the marshes of Glen, places where MacKays, with their motto of Manu Forti, strong hand, had lived for centuries, feuding with themselves and with other clans and becoming known for loyalty and for backing lost causes. He loved the idea of the clan, the one with the C, not the one with the K. And he stressed repeatedly to me that I should not allow some issue, large or small, to come between me and my brothers. And I assume that he said the same thing to them. He and his siblings lived this out for us, often vacationing together, making sure that we appreciated our extended clan. The long stretches of highway from Perry to Penland, Athena, Salem, and the road leading to Steenhatchee remind me that he liked to be alone in the woods, walking. He probably covered as many miles as walking Lawton, just not as publicly. These were retreats where there were no cell phones, no pagers. We were often an hour or more away from the nearest landline. Camping on Pine Islands at Econfina, listening to the deer dogs baying in the swamps along the Ocala, watching the mist rise over the mountains of North Carolina. These were his happy places. He wasn't much for small talk. Not sure if it was me or him who decided that one version of our hell would be a loud, perpetual cocktail party. Let me tell you what, that's how he would start off things that he really felt passionate about, a story from childhood or about politics or international affairs. Cross City, Old Town, Eugene, the old steel bridge over the river at Fanning Springs. I could hear him channeling a favorite father character in the book South Moon Under, whose one rule in the house was, don't cuss your mama at the table. He taught me his work ethic with, it's not raining unless you're getting wet, when I wanted to quit just because I was hot and tired and it looked like it might rain. When asked how he was doing, the ubiquitous, life is good, man. Turning east at Chiefland, crossing 24 that goes to Otter Creek and Cedar Key, passing through Bronson, Levyville, Williston, then across the Little Waukesasa and on to Blychton and Zuber. finally back in Marion County. He loved the poem If that's going to be read next. And when you hear these parts of If, here are some things in Dad's life that I think I know. I saw him live this out. Hey, buddy, you're a liberal. I know y'all heard that one. And Kipling, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves. He was never bitter about losing an election or losing the Groves to a freeze despite being completely prepared. Kipling, watch the things you've given your life to broken and stoop to rebuild them. Hey, buddy, you're the governor. Kipling, walk with kings, but not lose the common touch. He hated the idea of having to use a walker and a wheelchair and to wear adult garments as he got older, but he came to gracefully accept his limitations, as well as putting up with the mean and spiteful women who daily interrupted his warm, comfortable sleep and his coveted naps. And again, Kipling, force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and will them to hold on. I turn off 27 and go around Ocala now that Mom and Dad live at Lake Weir. So I've not lately retraced the roads he would have taken on through town, past the building that housed his law firm, the tire business my grandfather owned, down 8th Street through the historic district, and that last right turn into the driveway. I say, hey, buddy, you're a hell of a man. We will not see your like again. Well done. You have run the good race. You're home.
Please pray with me. Breath of life, guardian of death, living presence, Holy One, before whom generations rise and pass away. We give thanks for all those who, having lived this life in faith, now know life eternal. Especially, we are grateful for your servant Buddy. We offer thanks for the gift of his life, for the qualities in him that we have celebrated here today. We give thanks that for him pain is ended, and that his sacred pilgrimage has brought him into your eternal presence. Grant us faith to recognize signs of your kingdom, and where vision fails, to trust your love, which never fails. Through Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Okay, we're going to read the poem If by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good or talk too wise.
If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to, broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools.
If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on.
If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
So I'm just going to add one more thing. This you can visualize this as I'm sitting with Pop. I always called him Pop. Now that the grandkids call him Pop, sitting with Pop at some sort of political event, and I don't know why I was sitting next to him, but he's about to speak, and he's sitting there, and he says, "Okay, the important thing I have to remember: be sincere, be brief, be seated." Great advice. So thank you all for taking the time to be together with us. I hope that you will also join us for a reception over in the fellowship hall, which will follow. There will be food, time to reminisce. On a practical note, we're not going to have a receiving line. So if you find yourself in a line, you may be lost, or maybe you're waiting for food. Please, after the benediction, the family will go out first and then just follow the usher's instructions to get over to the hall. Thank you also for everything you have done, are doing, and will do in his memory. Dad would be deeply touched by all of this. The outpouring of cards, emails, gifts, hugs, food, visits to the family, it all means a lot. On behalf of the family, I want to also say a special thanks to Lori, Sarah, and Kathy. They were his tireless caregivers who helped him and Mom through the past few years. Thanks also to everyone who's made this event possible. It's been a huge operation. So thank you all for making this happen. And again, please join us for the reception. We're going to do just one verse of I'll Fly Away. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away to a home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll
Have you ever been as blessed in a memorial service, a funeral, as we have been blessed today with all of these memories? Thank you who spoke. Thank you who have gifted yourselves to us. I'm to do the benediction, but before I do it, I'm going to read just a small piece on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who many of you know was a young German scholar and theologian and Christian pastor, who was in the time when Hitler became a part of the German life. And as a pastor, he had written this little piece about a loved one dying. There is nothing that can replace the absence of someone dear to us, and one should not even attempt to do so. One must simply hold out and endure it. At first, that sounds very hard, but at the same time, it is also a great comfort. For to the extent the emptiness remains truly unfilled, one remains connected to the other person through it. It is wrong to say that God fills the emptiness. God in no way fills it, but precisely leaves it unfilled, and that thus helps us preserve, even in pain, the authentic relationship. Furthermore, the more beautiful and full the remembrances, the more difficult the separation. But gratitude transforms the torment of memory into silent joy. One bears what was lovely in the past, not as a thorn, but as a precious gift, deep within a hidden treasure of which one can always be certain. Buddy has been and will continue to be a precious gift and a hidden treasure. May the God of Buddy, who knew that he knew so well, be with us now and all of our days until our time to fly away comes. God bless us all and receive our gratitude. Amen.
Guess we can get up and go.
Al, thanks for providing the Zoom. I appreciate it so much.